Isaiah saw the second heaven, inside the vision. He stood in the presence of the angel, his spirit pulled upward through the clouds. His earthly body lay cold and motionless in the dust of Jerusalem. The prophet Isaiah was not shown a peaceful garden of rest. He was dropped into a contested firmament, where angelic armies were locked in perpetual slaughter. You have been taught that the sky is silent, but the text describes a violent battleground ruling over your daily reality today in 2026. Stay with me, because what he saw inside the second heaven changes everything. For centuries, the mainstream pulpits have avoided this suppressed vision, leaving the church blind to the true structure of the cosmos. They prefer to preach a simplified, comfortable view of heaven, telling you that everything above the clouds is silent and peaceful. But the ascension of Isaiah reveals a much more complex and dangerous reality. The prophet's ascent was not a passive journey. It was an active revelation of the celestial hierarchy and the forces that govern the earth. When Isaiah was escorted by the angel through the first portal of light, he saw that the physical universe is merely the outer gate of a vast spiritual temple. I believe that by understanding his journey, we can shatter the material illusion that keeps us trapped in the physical world. The first firmament was only the beginning of his ascent. As he stood in the second heaven, he witnessed a clashing of principalities and angelic guardians that directly mirrors the conflicts of our day. This was not a generic vision of the future. It was a map of the unseen warfare that shapes the rise and fall of nations. I believe that the clashing armies he saw are the same forces that influence our current reality. By decodifying this second heaven blueprint, we reveal the spiritual coordinates of the battle we are fighting. We must look beyond the physical headlines, recognizing the precision of the divine clock. Stay with me, because as we climb higher, the mystery becomes deeper. Furthermore, we must address the historical suppression of the ascension of Isaiah itself. This text was widely read and accepted by early Christian communities in the 1st and 2nd centuries, who understood the reality of the celestial hierarchy. Yet, as the state church began to centralize its authority in the 4th century, these apocalyptic writings were systematically gathered and locked away. The ruling elites could not tolerate a scriptural map that showed the territorial rulers of the air, because it exposed their own political power as a mere shadow of demonic networks. They replaced the multi-layered active cosmos of the prophets with a static, passive heaven, leaving believers spiritually isolated and dependent on the institutional priesthood. By restoring this vision, we are not introducing new doctrine, but reclaiming the ancient framework of the prophets to understand the spiritual battlefield of our generation. To comprehend the scale of this cosmic journey, we must examine the structure of the first heaven, as recorded in the ancient text. The ascension of Isaiah provides a detailed description of the first firmament, a realm that exists just beyond the physical atmosphere. The text in Ascension 7:13 declares, "And we ascended into the first heaven, and there I saw a throne in the midst, and on the right and on the left of it were angels, and they sang praise to the one who sat upon the throne. But the angels on the left did not sing like those on the right." This structural detail reveals that even in the lowest heaven, there is a clear division and a strict order. The angelic praise is not a chaotic wall of sound. It is a structured, harmonic response to the glory of the Creator. The first firmament governs the physical lights of our sky, the courses of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The angels serving this realm are responsible for maintaining the cosmic balance, ensuring that the seasons and the portals of light operate according to the divine calendar. In my view, this firmament is the bridge between the physical and the spiritual, the place where the celestial movements are translated into earthly reality. Yet, mainstream theology has reduced these descriptions to primitive poetry, ignoring the mathematical precision of the text. By looking at the first heaven through the lens of the ascension, we see that the universe is not a collection of random rocks in space, but a highly organized temple of light. I believe this first step of the ascent was designed to prepare the prophet's eyes for the higher realms. The division between the angels on the right and the left shows that even before reaching the war zone of the second heaven, the duality of light and darkness is present. The silent order of this firmament stands as a contrast to the chaos of the earth. The angels on the right, who sing with greater intensity, represent the alignment with the divine throne, while those on the left represent a lesser degree of glory. By understanding this structure, we begin to see that the heavens are not a uniform expanse of clouds, but a series of distinct firmaments, each with its own jurisdiction and its own angelic host. We must study these boundaries if we are to understand the forces that govern our lives.
I have been sitting with the memory of the first heaven throne room, contemplating the strict allogic ranking that structured the lowest firmament. It is easy to think of heaven as a place of uniform equality, but the text describes a highly structured hierarchy.
The throne room is a place of absolute order, where every angel knows their position and their function. The angels on the right receive the light directly from the throne, reflecting it to the left. In my view, this sacred order is the blueprint for all spiritual authority. The quiet stability of this realm stands as a direct challenge to the rebellion that exists in the higher firmaments, showing that the Creator's design is built on harmony and obedience. This angelic ranking is not a system of oppression, but a system of alignment. The closer an angel is to the center of the throne, the more intense their praise and their light. When we look at the structural order of the first heaven, we realize that the spiritual realm operates on a completely different system of values than the world. Here on earth, we fight for personal status and individual power. In the first firmament, the angels find their purpose in reflecting the light of the Creator. By studying this sacred order, we see that true spiritual strength is found in alignment, not in rebellion. We must align our own lives with this heavenly template if we are to withstand the chaos of the coming days. Let us look deeper at why the physical universe is only the outer gate. What we see through our telescopes, the vast expanse of stars, galaxies, and planetary systems, is merely the material illusion, the physical shell that hides the true spiritual dimensions. The Bible warns us that the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. The physical universe is a shadow, a legal boundary established to keep humanity isolated from the cosmic conflict until the appointed time. The scriptural key to unlocking these higher realms is not technology, but spiritual discernment. If we rely on the material sciences to explain the cosmos, we will remain trapped at the outer gate, blind to the angelic forces that govern the movements of history. The central banking system, the global grids, and the digital networks are all designed to keep your mind locked in this material illusion. They want you to believe that the physical world is the only reality, and that your survival depends on their ledger. But when we look through the portal of Isaiah's vision, we see that the physical earth is merely the footstool, and the true decisions that shape our lives are made in the higher firmaments. We must step through the outer gate, reclaiming our spiritual inheritance. Furthermore, we must examine the living nature of the celestial bodies themselves. Modern materialist astronomy teaches that the planets are dead spheres of rock and gas orbiting in a vacuum, driven only by gravity. But the ancient Enochian and Isaiah frameworks reveal that each star and planet is a celestial intelligence, an angel walking its appointed path. When the text describes the angels on the right and left of the first throne, it is describing the planetary guardians who guide the flow of cosmic energy to the earth. When these guardians sing in harmony, the cycles of rain, harvest, and light on earth are balanced. But when there is a misalignment, or when humanity attempts to alter these natural times using artificial calendars, the harmony is broken, leading to seasonal confusion. The first heaven is the control room of the physical earth, and by studying its structures, we learn that physical nature is not a machine, but a direct extension of angelic obedience. We must return to the biblical calendar, aligning our lives with the celestial order rather than the artificial templates of the banking system. As the prophet Isaiah climbed past the first firmament, the silent praise of the lowest heaven was suddenly replaced by the sound of war. The transition was violent and immediate. The text in Ascension 7:18 reveals the actual structure of the higher realms. And we ascended into the second heaven, And there I saw a throne in the midst, and angels on the right and on the left. And they did not praise like the angels of the first heaven, but they were wrestling and fighting one with another, and there was angelic slaughter and warfare upon the earth. Let that description sink into your spirit. Angelic slaughter. The second heaven is not a realm of quiet contemplation. It is a violent, contested war zone, where principalities are locked in constant battle for control of the air. This second firmament is the primary staging ground for the spiritual war that shapes the physical earth. The angels of this realm are not unified in praise. They are divided into warring factions, fighting over territorial boundaries, resource lanes, and human devotion. In my view, this cosmic warfare is the source of all historical conflicts. The wars we see on the earth, the clashing of empires, the struggles for resources, and the rises of dictators are merely the physical shadows of the battles raging in the second heaven. The principalities of this realm use human populations as foot soldiers, manipulating their passions to advance their own angelic campaigns. By ignoring this clashing firmament, the modern church has left believers defenseless against the spiritual forces that rule the air. The reality of this angelic slaughter is the ultimate proof that the heavens are not a uniform paradise. It shows us that the spiritual realm is a complex battlefield, and that the space above our heads is contested territory. I believe this vision was suppressed by the early state church because it exposes the vulnerability of the imperial system. If the population understood that the rulers of this world are bound to warring principalities, they would refuse to bow to their authority. The quiet sky myth was established to keep you passive, to make you believe that the physical world is the only place of conflict. But the ascension of Isaiah shatters this illusion, showing that the air is pulsing with war, and that the decisions made in the second heaven determine the fate of the earth. We must study this battlefield if we are to stand named in the coming days.
Between you and me, we have to talk about who is ruling the second firmament. The ancient texts identified the leaders of this warring host as Samael, a powerful angelic principality who is also known as Satan or the dragon.
Samael is the cosmic ruler of the second heaven, governing the principalities and powers that control the air. He is not a red creature with a pitchfork living in a cave. He is a majestic, fallen guardian seated on a throne in the second firmament. The text describes how Samael and his hosts are in a state of permanent rebellion, refusing to bow to the authority of the throne. This Samael principality has established a network of control over the earth, using territorial princes to govern specific nations and cultures. The princes of darkness are not interested in personal sins. They are focused on systemic structures, governments, monetary systems, and religious institutions. They establish their seats over the centers of human power, directing the policies and the laws to align with their rebellion. In my view, this is why the institutions of this world are so hostile to the truth. They are the physical outlets of Samael's network, designed to keep humanity in a state of spiritual blindness. By understanding the nature of these princes of darkness, we see that the struggle is not against flesh and blood. It is a war against spiritual principalities. The quiet sky myth taught by mainstream churches has created a state of spiritual isolation, making you believe that you are alone in your struggles. They have turned the gospel into a personal self-help program, ignoring the massive cosmic conflict that surrounds us. But this cover-up is a strategic move to keep you from asserting your covenant authority. If you do not know the enemy exists, you will never fight for the gates. I believe this spiritual isolation is the greatest prophetic threat we face today. The principalities of the air are actively building a cashless grid of control, a technological replica of the second heaven block. They want to monitor every transaction, control every movement, and censor every voice that speaks the truth. In my view, this digital cage is the modern abomination, and it is being directed by the same forces that Isaiah saw clashing in the second heaven. We must recognize the source of this grid, refusing to submit to the system of Samael. Only by reclaiming our spiritual sovereignty can we break the power of the air. Therefore, we must reject the quiet sky theology of the pulpit. The heavens are in a state of intense, active conflict. and our lives are directly connected to the outcome of this war. Every time we stand for the truth, we are engaging in this second heaven battle. In my view, the coming days will bring a massive convergence of this warfare, and only those who are anchored in the covenant will stand steady. We must prepare our houses, put on the full armor of light, and stand named as the true remnant. The war is not coming. It is already raging, and the gates are open. Furthermore, let us consider the writings of the early church fathers on this celestial battleground. Giants of the early faith, like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus of Lyons, wrote extensively about the territorial conflicts of the fallen angels. They did not teach that the sky was a neutral, empty void. Instead, they described the atmosphere as a thick, contested space where the rebel angels, having lost their original dignity, fought constantly to intercept divine revelations and to mislead the rulers of the earth. These early teachers understood that when an earthly empire went to war, it was because the territorial angels of those nations had locked horns in the second heaven. By restoring this patristic understanding alongside Isaiah's vision, we see that the early church was fully aware of the angelic slaughter. This exposes the modern theological vacuum, which has stripped the believer of the understanding needed to fight these atmospheric forces. We must re-examine this historical consensus, recognizing that our struggle is part of an ancient, ongoing angelic siege.
When I first sat down to study Paul's Armor of God in the winter of 2017, I was struck by the specific legal terminology he used to describe our spiritual opponent. Most pastors preach Ephesians 6 as a generic lesson on personal holiness, telling you to put on shield and sword to fight personal temptation.
But when you look at the Greek text, Paul reads like a military strategist or a legal expert defining the jurisdictions of the Roman Empire. He does not speak of vague demonic whispers. He lists specific structural ranks of authority. The Bible warns us in Ephesians 6 verse 12, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Let that precise list sink into your mind. Principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness. This list is a legal definition of the hierarchy ruling the air. Paul is not describing local demons. He is describing the celestial principalities that govern nations, institutions, and global trade networks. The Greek term for high places is eporanios, which literally translates to heavenly realms or firmaments. This means our struggle is not against physical systems, but against the spiritual forces that occupy the heavens. In my view, this is where the theology of the modern pulpit completely fails. By reducing this warfare to a personal struggle against sin, they keep you blind to the massive spiritual structures that control the physical world. It seems to me that the church has deliberately minimized the scale of this conflict to keep believers from claiming their corporate authority over the air. This unseen conflict is not a theological theory. It is a documented reality. Every principality has a specific territorial jurisdiction, a legal authority granted to them by the laws and the compliance of the human population below. When we participate in the systems of Babylon, borrowing from their temple, submitting to their censorship, and accepting their compromises, we are granting legal standing to the rulers of the air. I believe this understanding is the key to unlocking the power of the armor. We are not fighting for personal survival. We are contesting the legal jurisdiction of the second heaven. By recognizing the structure of the enemy, we can begin to target the gates, dismantling their systems of control. We must put on the full armor of light if we are to stand named in this hour. Now let us analyze how these territorial bounds operate in our physical reality. The principalities of the air do not rule by raw force. They rule through legal authority. They establish their seats over cities, nations, and trade lanes, using human compliance to enforce their laws. When a government passes a law that violates the covenant boundaries, such as legalizing usury or promoting false worship, they are officially inviting the ruling principality to occupy the gate. The territorial boundaries of the angels match the political and economic borders of the earth. This human compliance is the spiritual battery that powers their system. If the population refuses to participate in the compromise, the principality loses its legal standing, and its grid of control collapses. This is why the beast system is so focused on building a centralized digital ledger. By forcing every citizen to participate in their cashless cage, they establish a legal claim over the labor and the resources of the entire population. In my view, this is not just about commerce. It is an angelic trade, a way to feed Samael's net with the spiritual energy of human submission.
I must admit my own past failure in this area. For years I read Ephesians 6 as a personal letter, completely missing the corporate and theoretical scale of Paul's warning. I was wrong to limit the text in this way.
I had missed the reality that the armor of God is not for individual survival, but for the displacement of the principalities of the air. When I sat down to cross-reference Ephesians with the ascension of Isaiah, the second heaven key instantly unlocked the text. I realized that the place where we wrestle is the exact same contested firmament that Isaiah saw. This Pauline cross-ref reveals that the unseen conflict is a legal war for the air. The principalities are trying to block the signals of the divine throne, creating a layer of noise that prevents the remnant from receiving the covenant instructions. By understanding this, we see that the ascension is the physical map of the battlefield Paul described. The 6 firmaments are the steps of our climb, and the second heaven is the gate we must clear. I believe that by reclaiming this map, the remnant can break through the noise, aligning themselves with the true throne and releasing the covenant wealth of the ancestors. We must stop fighting the shadows, targeting the principalities that rule the air. To fully dissect the legal machinery of Ephesians 6, we must look at the Greek words archos and exousia. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, an archy was not a random force, but a magistrate holding supreme judicial and executive power over a city-state. An exousia was the legal right to enforce that power. When Paul used these terms, he was telling the first-century church that the pagan temples in Ephesus, Rome, and Alexandria were not empty monuments. They were the physical embassies of these cosmic magistrates. When the Roman proconsul sat on his judgment seat, his decisions were the direct shadow of the decrees issued by the archy ruling the air above that city. This explains why the Roman legal system was so obsessively focused on crushing the early Christian movement. The Christians refused to burn incense to the emperor, which was the legal mechanism of compliance that fed the territorial archy. By refusing to comply, the early church was actively cutting the spiritual power lines of the empire, executing a localized Shemitah that displaced the principalities of the air. We must apply the same strategy today, recognizing that our refusal to align with the modern temple is a direct strike against their legal jurisdiction. Now let us connect this Pauline warning to the final book of our canon, because the book of Revelation provides the dramatic climax of this second heaven warfare. The text in Revelation 12 describes a massive conflict that reshapes the entire spiritual geography of the universe. The Bible declares in Revelation 12, verse 7 and 8, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought, and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven." Think about the scale of that battle. Michael War. This is not a metaphor for personal struggles. It is a literal, cosmic clash between the chief prince of the covenant and the ruling principality of the air. This dragon fight was not fought in the third heaven where the Creator dwells, nor was it fought on the physical earth. It was fought in the second heaven, the contested firmament where Samael and his hosts had established their seat of authority. For millennia, the principalities of the air had maintained their access to the heavenly realms, acting as the accusers of the brethren and intercepting the spiritual signals of the earth. But Revelation 12 marks the boundary line. Michael and his angelic forces launched a campaign to cleanse the second heaven, forcibly removing the dragon and his hosts from their positions of power. In my view, this heavenly cleansing is the key that unlocks the timing of the end times, showing that the physical crises on the earth are the direct result of this cosmic eviction. The defeat of the dragon was absolute, They prevailed not, and their place was no longer found in the heavens. This means that the second firmament, which had been Samael's staging ground for centuries, was completely cleared of his presence. I believe this cleansing represents a massive legal shift. By losing their standing in the second heaven, the principalities lost their ability to block the signals of the throne, allowing the covenant remnant on earth to receive the full power of the divine inheritance. By recognizing this pattern, we see that the warfare in the sky is the precursor to our liberation. The dragon was cast out into the earth, and with him, his angels were cast out, initiating the final struggle for the physical gates. We must stand awake, recognizing that the battle is moving rapidly toward its earthly climax. Most prophecy teachers tell you that the war in heaven occurred before the creation of Adam, or that it is a symbolic description of the fall of Lucifer in the ancient past. They want you to believe that this conflict is safely in the past, and that the air above your head is completely empty and peaceful. But I have come to see that these teachers are hiding the true timeline. The casting down of the dragon is a future event, a strategic shift that occurs during the midst of the final week. When the dragon is cast out, the heavens celebrate, but the earth is warned. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. This woe to earth is the direct result of the second heaven cleansing. When Samael loses his seat in the firmament, he descends to the earth with maximum fury, attempting to establish his digital cage before his time runs out. The cashless net, the CBDC abomination, and the centralized ledger are his desperate attempts to build a physical duplicate of the second heaven grid. He wants to enforce complete control over physical transactions because he can no longer control the spiritual air. In my view, this is why the economic pressure is accelerating today in 2026. The principalities are running out of time, and they are trying to lock the population in the cage before the final eviction. But this eviction is also the moment of our liberation. The second heaven is still a contested space today, a realm where the principalities are sending interfering signals to keep the remnant asleep. They use the media, the church, and the financial systems to broadcast a frequency of fear, debt, and compliance. But the believer's authority, backed by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, bypasses this second heaven block. We have the legal right to ignore their frequencies, tuning our spirits directly to the voice of the true throne. I believe the clashing signals in the air are a sign that the eviction is already underway. The principalities are screaming because their grid is cracking, and the light of the higher heavens is beginning to penetrate the second firmament. The remnant must rise above the air, claiming their covenant authority and refusing to participate in Samael's net. By building our own networks, securing our own assets, and standing named, we prepare ourselves for the day when the dragon is cast out and the true kingdom is established. The war is raging above us, but the victory is already sealed in the ledger of the Father. We must walk in that truth, standing firm in our calling. To fully grasp this cosmic transition, we must analyze the concept of interfering signals in detail. In electrical engineering, a jamming frequency is broadcast to disrupt communication between 2 points, rendering the receiver blind and deaf. This is exactly how the rulers of the darkness of this world operate. They have built an invisible electronic canopy over our heads, transmitting constant waves of distraction, anxiety, and consumerism. Every screen you touch, every news alert you read, and every sermon that dilutes the severity of the times acts as a repeater tower for this atmospheric jammer. They want your consciousness locked in a perpetual loop of survival and debt, completely disconnected from the memory logs of the third heaven. When your spirit is tuned to their frequency, you are legally compliant with their grid. But the moment you exit their paper matrix and step onto covenant soil, you tune into the high-frequency transmission of the throne. The jamming loses its hold, the noise fades, and the voice of the Father becomes clear and sharp. The second heaven block is real, but it is powerless against a remnant that refuses to listen to the air. We must change our frequency today, tuning out the noise to hear the orders of the chief Prince Michael. I have been sitting with the silent beauty of the third heaven in Isaiah's vision, trying to understand the transition from the cosmic war zone to the realms of pure light. As the prophet ascended past the clashing principalities of the second firmament, he entered a place of profound silence and order. The text in Ascension 7:20-18 describes this transition. And we ascended into the third heaven, and there I saw those who were in that heaven, and they were in great glory, and there was no praise there, but they sat in silence, and their names were written in the books of life. This silent praise is not the absence of worship. It is the ultimate expression of reverence. In this third firmament, the angels do not wage war, nor do they reflect the dualities of light and darkness. They are guardians of the memory logs, the cosmic records where every human thought, action, and transaction is permanently recorded. The third heaven is the library of the universe, the place where the judgment scroll is kept. In my view, this silent order is the direct foundation of the spiritual laws that govern the earth. The records kept in this firmament determine when the Shemitah is enforced and when the debt bubble must pop. The universe is not a chaotic expanse of space. It is a meticulously logged house, and every transaction is monitored by these silent guardians. I believe that by ignoring the third heaven structure, modern theology has lost the key to understanding how judgment is recorded and executed. The church has taught you that your deeds are forgotten, but the ascension reveals that everything is written in the memory logs of the higher heavens. This is not about condemnation, but about legal reality. The ancestral deeds of the covenant people are preserved in this firmament, waiting to be claimed. If we do not know that these records exist, we will never claim our covenant inheritance. We must align ourselves with the silent order of the third heaven, tuning our spirits to the frequency of the divine ledger. Only then can we stand named before the throne. To understand how these memory logs affect our physical life, we must look at the legal nature of the records kept in the third heaven. The angels of this firmament are not writing vague stories. They are maintaining the judgment scroll, a precise record of covenant compliance. Every time a nation violates the Shemitah, every time a creditor traps a brother in permanent interest, and every time the ancestral heritage is stolen, a legal claim is recorded in this third firmament. The memory logs are the absolute record of justice, a ledger that cannot be altered or hacked by human banking systems. This means that our ancestral deeds, the prayers, the sufferings, and the faithfulness of our parents are preserved in light. This is not ancient history. It is a live contract. When the appointed year of release arrives, the silent guardians present the ledger to the throne, and the judgment is executed on the earth to balance the accounts. The desolate land rest and the economic resets we witness are the physical enforcements of this third heaven ledger. If the modern empire refuses to cancel the debts, the ledger will forcibly clear them through collapse. In my view, this is why the rulers of the world are so desperate to build their own centralized grid. They want to create a counterfeit memory log that tracks you on earth, keeping you blind to the ledger that is currently tracking them in heaven. Between you and me, the reason these removed texts were excluded from the canon by the Roman councils is that they reveal the legal machinery of heaven. The 4th century Roman Council was not just concerned with heresy. They were establishing the religious grid of the empire. They wanted a canon that supported the authority of the state, and to do that, they had to suppress the maps of the higher heavens. If the people knew that the Roman tax and debt systems were being logged in the third heaven as covenant violations, they would have recognized the empire as the beast system it was. Hiding the ascension of Isaiah was a strategic move to maintain imperial control. By keeping the church blind to this celestial structure, they created a passive theology that accepts systemic oppression as the will of God. They taught you to wait for a quiet sky in the future, while the principalities of the air continue to drain your covenant wealth today. In my view, the restoration of these texts is a prophetic threat to their control grid. By reading the Ascension, we reclaim the map of the firmaments, recognizing that the centralized digital ledger they are building today is a counterfeit of the third heaven memory logs. We must align ourselves with the true ledger, preparing our houses for the divine reset that will erase their system forever. Furthermore, we must examine the specific historical mechanisms of this suppression. When Emperor Constantine initiated the Council of Nicaea, in AD 325, and subsequent local councils, like Laodicea in AD 363. The primary objective was the standardization of imperial order. Under the guise of theological purification, the state church systematically targeted the prophetic books that mapped the higher heavens. They did not merely ban these books. They declared ownership of the very definition of Scripture. By branding the ascension of Isaiah as apocryphal, they effectively blocked early Christians from understanding the legal jurisdiction of the third heaven's memory logs. This was a critical administrative maneuver. If the population understood that the Roman imperial tax code and debt loops were registered as cosmic violations, the theological justification for the empire's financial monopoly would disintegrate. By locking these texts in the vault, the state church established a spiritual monopoly that mirrored Rome's physical monopoly on trade. Reclaiming the ascension today is an act of historical decolonization, a restoration of the maps they stole to keep us in debt. We must look at this historical suppression not as a theological debate, but as a corporate restructuring of the ancient world. The heavenly hierarchy is not a distant, abstract reality. It is the spiritual blueprint that shapes every earthly kingdom. The scriptures reveal that the structures of human government are merely the earthly shadows of the principalities ruling the second heaven. Every major nation, every global capital, and every central banking system is bound to a specific angelic ruler. These angelic rulers do not operate in a vacuum. They establish spiritual networks that project their authority downward into physical institutions. When the Roman Empire rose, it was the physical shadow of the Western principalities establishing their transaction net over the Mediterranean. These spiritual networks are designed to intercept the prayers and the resource flows of the covenant people. The territorial guardians fight over trade lanes and currency grids because control of the physical economy is the primary mechanism of spiritual control. If they can force a population to rely on their debt-based ledger, they establish a legal claim over their souls. In my view, this is why the modern central banking system is so hostile to the biblical calendar of release. It is the physical shadow of Samael's rebellion, a counterfeit temple designed to keep humanity in a state of perpetual debt. I believe that by recognizing this connection, we can begin to target the principalities that rule our cities, dismantling their grids of control. The clashing of the angelic armies in the second heaven is the true source of all geopolitical shifts. When we see nations rising against nations, or when we witness the collapse of global alliances, we are watching the physical resolution of a conflict that has already occurred in the firmament. The physical rulers are merely executing the decrees of their spiritual guardians. By understanding this, we see that political solutions are useless. We cannot vote our way out of a spiritual cage. We must rise above the earthly shadows, claiming our authority in the higher heavens, and aligning ourselves with the divine executioners who will dismantle the beast grid on the appointed day. We must stand named, ready for the reset. I must admit my own past errors in missing the cosmic scale of the beloved's descent. For years, I read the Gospels as a simple biography of Jesus, focusing entirely on his earthly ministry in Judea. I was wrong to limit the narrative in this way. I had missed the reality that the incarnation was a strategic infiltration of Samael's territory, a military campaign that began in the higher firmaments. The ascension of Isaiah chapter 10 verse 11 provides the keys to this mystery. And the Lord said unto me, Go forth through all the heavens, and descend to the firmament, and to that world, and disguise thyself so that none of the angels of those heavens may know thee. This unseen descent was a covert operation. The beloved had to pass through the 6 firmaments without alerting the angelic rulers of the air. If the principalities of the second heaven had recognized him, they would have locked their portals to prevent him from reaching the earth. He disguised his glory, appearing to the angels of each heaven in their own form, slipping past their surveillance networks. In my view, this covert descent proves that the physical earth is under a state of spiritual siege. The central banking system, the global grids, and the digital ledgers are all parts of the occupation grid established by the principalities. The beloved bypassed this grid to establish a legal beachhead for our liberation. opening a portal of authority that the beast system cannot close. The modern temple builders have established a grid of control that mimics the angelic surveillance of the second heaven. They use technology, fiat currency, digital transactions, and social credit systems to monitor and control every human action. This beast grid is designed to intercept spiritual signals, keeping the remnant from aligning with the divine throne. They want to create a cashless cage where your ability to survive depends entirely on your compliance with their ledger. But this grid is a counterfeit, a physical copy of Samael's net that is bound to the same eviction decree. I believe this clashing of calendars is the defining battle of our generation. The central bankers are trying to lock the population in their digital cage before the 2027 window. They want to replace physical money with central bank digital currencies, creating a centralized ledger that can turn off your resource access at will. But they cannot override the Shemitah clock. The 7-year Sabbath cycle is a spiritual law built into the very fabric of creation. When the appointed year arrives, the counterfeit grid will be broken, and the sovereign wealth of the nations will be returned to the covenant remnant. We must withdraw from their temple today, preparing our houses for the collapse of the counterfeit shield. To fully understand the legal precision of this covert operation, we must examine why the disguise was necessary. The rulers of the second heaven, sitting on their thrones in the contested air, are legalists. They operate under the cosmic treaties and boundaries established after the rebellion. If the beloved had descended in his full, unshielded glory, the principalities of the second firmament would have claimed a treaty violation, rallying all their warring hosts to block the descent. By disguising himself as a servant angel of each firmament, he bypassed their customs gates, legally entering the physical territory of the earth without firing a single shot in the air. The rulers of this world only realized the trap when the blood was shed on the cross, an act that legally canceled the debt ledger they had used to bind humanity. This shows us that spiritual victory is not won by loud rebellion, but by legal infiltration. The modern temple builders try to mimic this infiltration by slowly slipping their digital currencies into the market, hoping you will accept the digital cage before you realize it is a prison. Historically, ancient emperors used centralized tax nodes and temple tributes to enforce this exact same compliance, channeling the labor of millions directly to the shrines of the planetary deities. We must study the beloved strategy, learning to operate within our covenant rights to bypass the beast grid. Our exit must be clean, legal, and absolute. Most political commentators tell you that the conflicts of our world are driven by resource scarcity, election cycles, or simple economic competition. They focus on the decisions of earthly leaders, trying to explain the shifts of history using purely secular theories. But I believe these commentators are missing the true force behind these events. The chaos we are witnessing is not a random occurrence. It is bound to the biblical Sabbath clock. The 2027 window represents the climax of this current 7-year cycle, a point where the cosmic war in the second heaven converges with the physical reality of the earth. This is the time convergence, a sovereign reset that aligns perfectly with the calendar of the higher heavens. The angelic principalities of the air are running out of time. They know that their eviction from the second heaven is approaching, and they are desperately trying to lock humanity in their digital grid before their standing is lost. This shift is not a slow process. It is a rapid acceleration that is currently manifesting as economic and geopolitical crises. When the 2027 window arrives, the clashing portals will reach their peak, and the spiritual block will be felt across the entire globe. In my view, this transition is a divine intervention, a cleansing of the air to allow the light of the throne to penetrate the earth. By understanding this, we see that the crisis is not a theory, but a mathematical certainty locked to the cosmic calendar. We must look beyond the secular headlines, recognizing the precision of the clock that is currently ticking down to the final clash. The systems of this world are being shaken because their spiritual guardians are in a state of panic. The petrodollar shield, the fiat currency networks, and the central banking grids are all cracking under the weight of the coming reset. The second heaven war is moving to its conclusion, and the principalities are preparing their final digital cage to preserve their authority. But their dominion is running out, and the clashing gates of 2027 will shatter their counterfeit temple. We must prepare our houses for this transition, aligning ourselves with the divine calendar to stand free. When the spiritual war reaches its climax, the second heaven will experience a sudden and complete closing of portals. This is the midst of the week, the point where the daily transaction network of the principalities is forcibly frozen. In our physical reality, this closing of portals will manifest as a global grid failure, a sudden shutdown of the electronic transaction channels that hold the debt-based economy together. The daily freeze is not an accident. It is the direct result of the angelic clashing, a sovereign check that stops the flow of counterfeit signals across the air. In my view, this freeze is the final warning before the dragon is cast out. The daily freeze will create a vacuum of commerce, a state of crisis that the modern temple builders will attempt to exploit. They will blame the shutdown on a cyber attack or a cosmic event, offering their centralized digital ledger as the only way to restore order. They will promise to reopen the transaction portals if you submit to their new regulations, offering security in exchange for your commercial sovereignty. But this solution is the digital cage of the beast, a counterfeit covenant designed to bypass the Shemitah and bind humanity in a permanent cashless matrix. We must recognize the trap before the gates close.
I have been sitting with the dark reality of these transitions for months, watching how they prepare the CBDC abominations. The digital ledger is the physical replica of the second heaven block, a system designed to monitor everyday transactions and censor every voice.
It is the structural framework of the mark of the beast, where your ability to buy or sell is controlled by a central server. By understanding this, we see that the abomination is not a future possibility. It is already standing at the door of our generation. I believe this digital cage is the ultimate weapon of Samael's hosts, a system that desolates the soul by stripping you of your spiritual and commercial sovereignty. We must refuse to enter their cashless temple. In the midst of this coming cashless net, the covenant remnant is called to rise and claim their true spiritual sovereignty. We were not designed to be passive victims of the beast grid. The scriptures promise that those who align themselves with the higher heavens will receive Michael protection during the final clash. Michael, the chief prince of the covenant, will stand up to defend the inheritance of the chosen, dismantling the second heaven block and clearing the path for our liberation. The remnant rise is a return to the ancient ways of trade, a complete exit from the debt-based ledger of Babylon. This exit requires a physical and spiritual preparation. We must secure tangible assets, arable land, fresh water, physical seeds, and local relationships that operate outside their centralized network. We must return to gold, silver, and direct exchanges, building parallel trade systems that the central banks cannot touch. In my view, this is not just about survival. It is about establishing sanctuaries of covenant authority on the earth. The wealth accumulated in their digital temple is legally forfeit, and when the Shemitah strikes, the angelic forces of the Father will redistribute these resources to the faithful remnant. We must be positioned to receive this inheritance, walking in the light of the true heavens. Therefore, you must begin to withdraw your resources from their banking temple today. Refuse the usury traps, secure physical assets, and return to the land of your ancestors. The clashing gates of 2027 are about to close, and the air is pulsing with war. But for the covenant people of God, this is the hour of our vindication. In my view, the ascension of Isaiah is the key that unlocks our freedom, showing us the map of the battlefield and the certainty of our victory. Stand named, align your house with the covenant, and rise above the air. You are free. Furthermore, let us examine the geopolitical alignment that is driving this economic transition. The current 7-year Sabbath cycle began in the autumn of 2022 and will conclude in the autumn of 2029. But the midst of the week, the 3.5-year midpoint, lands precisely in 2027. This midpoint is the threshold of maximum tension. Currently, the BRICS alliance is actively working to bypass the US dollar, creating a gold-backed currency and establishing alternative payment networks to bypass the SWIFT system. This is not just a trade war. It is a physical nuclease of the petrodollar shield. When the 2027 window arrives, the diversion of the global oil trade away from the dollar will trigger an instant devaluation of the Western debt ledger, causing the SWIFT network to freeze. This daily transaction cessation will shut down the markets, preventing the flow of credit and freezing personal bank accounts. The central banks will use this crisis to initiate the CBDC abomination, presenting the digital ledger as the only solution to the chaos. This is the cashless cage, a system where your access to resources is tied to a centralized database that monitors your compliance. We must also expose the infrastructure that the tech conglomerates and central banks have spent years building in silence. They have quietly established biometric scanning terminals in major retail hubs, integrated digital identity frameworks into local licensing systems, and launched mock runs of transaction freezing under the guise of security audits. This is the physical anchor of the second heaven grid, a network designed to ensure that when the daily freeze occurs, the transition to the cashless cage will be immediate. If you do not have the digital identity, you will be locked out of the marketplace. We must execute the remnant exit today. We must withdraw our wealth from their digital portals, investing in physical land, building community wells, and establishing local trade loops. Only those who have stepped outside the paper matrix will survive the 2027 daily freeze. Walk in truth. Your freedom is sealed. Scholars have weighed these texts for centuries and disagree on much. What I've offered is one careful reading, verifiable in the citations above. Study the primary sources for yourself. It is not my intention to claim absolute certainty on the exact calendar day of these coming events, but rather to present the undeniable mathematical pattern that exists in Scripture. The Christian tradition holds many interpretations, and I encourage you to bring these passages to your own study, praying over them with a sincere heart. In my view, the alignment of the Shemitah with modern economic shifts is a compelling pattern that cannot be lightly dismissed. However, we must remain humble in our calculations, recognizing that the times and seasons are ultimately in the hands of the Father. This is not about building fear, but about building awareness. Take what serves you from this research, examine the historical records, and let the holy text speak directly to your spirit as you walk this path of truth. Furthermore, we must look at the broader scholarly debate surrounding these apocryphal documents. Scholars of early Judeo-Christian apocalypticism have noted that texts like the Ascension of Isaiah and the Book of Enoch were not written as wild speculations, but as precise mathematical models of the cosmos. They used the astronomical portals and the heavenly hierarchies to explain the spiritual laws that govern human history. By comparing these writings with canonical passages like Ephesians 6 and Revelation 12, we reveal a unified, ancient worldview that has been deliberately fragmented by modern institutional theology. This is not a hobby for the curious. It is a critical academic field that unlocks the true timeline of our generation. We must examine the primary records with academic rigor, refusing to settle for the simplified summaries of the modern pulpit.
Now, between you and me, I know this message carry a heavy weight. I know the reality of this coming economic reset and feel overwhelming, but I need you to stand firm in this hour, knowing that you are not left comfortless.
Let us pray together for divine protection over your house and your family. Pray with me now. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the revelation of your word and the mathematical precision of your cycles. We ask for your divine protection over every truth seeker watching this today. Keep them covered under your wings as the global systems shake. Grant them the wisdom to prepare their houses and the strength to exit the paper matrix. We pray for a powerful remnant awakening across the earth, that your people would rise in spiritual sovereignty and reclaim their covenant heritage. We seal this prayer in your holy and mighty name, trusting in your justice and your promise. Amen. If this message opened your eyes to the true pattern of the Sabbath clock, leave a comment with your city and the word watching. Tell me where you are witnessing this awakening. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, because our next run goes even deeper into the apocryphal secrets of the Book of Enoch and the history omitted from the modern canon. We will examine the fallen watchers, the division of the earth, and the hidden gates of the north. Refuse the lies of the system, stand named, and walk in truth. Therefore, please leave a watching comment below with your city. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more prophetic updates. Subscribe now to stay covered and walk in truth. The content provided on Dark Eyes is for educational, historical, and entertainment purposes only. The views, interpretations, and chronological calculations expressed in this video represent spiritual and philosophical analyses of ancient texts and do not constitute financial, legal, or professional advice. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own independent research and exercise personal judgment.